Oh, nice. Christy's saying this is the first time she's fully dropped in. So that's very cool to hear. Nice to hear, and thank you. With nonlinear, it's always an interesting thing because the more you actually go there with your body, the quicker your body will start accessing these parts that we're working with, which is essentially your body's natural genius of self-regulation and self-release. So super happy to hear that.
I just had a question. I went to the dentist last week and I was in the dental chair for a good 3 hours, my jaw really wide open, and a little bit of freezing and drilling and various things. And I tried to keep moving subtly throughout that appointment. And I was thinking about nonlinear and just giving my nervous system and my body kind of something else to focus on besides the hands in my mouth and the alien abduction kind of, everyone's super masked up at the dental office now with the shields and everything. And I just wondered what your thoughts are about bringing obviously a subtle nonlinear practice into a treatment like that.
Yes, I love the alien abduction analogy. That is so funny. I see Gigi is also laughing there. That is so funny because that is definitely true. Yeah, well, I can say a lot about that because I actually have a quite substantial dental trauma from my childhood, some really rather horrible things. And so going to the dentist is definitely something that requires a lot of nonlinear from my end. Okay. So there's a few strategies. So one of the strategies that I always employ is that I essentially do a whole bunch up front, which now it's too late, of course, but if you have to do it again, I do a whole bunch up front and I make sure that I have no stressors in my system going in, because of course these are accumulative, right? So that's that. But then once you're there, you can definitely wiggle your fingers and your toes and a little bit, like I keep a little bit of an undulation in the spine, just so that I feel that I'm not getting frozen. Yeah. Right. And essentially focus all my attention on my extremities, which is typically where we lose sensation first, right? So lots of wiggling, depending on what kind of dentist it is. Sometimes I just make sure I wear really roomy shoes so I can wiggle my toes to my heart's content. And sometimes I just let it happen. So that's that. But one of the things that I still do, I had braces for a while, which was really not very good. I did facial nonlinear. So when I did sessions, I would do a lot of moving and tensing and releasing and working with that whole area to counteract some of that stuck and frozen thing. And then what would happen is I'd have that kind of subtle terror washing out of my system, which I would then attend to. So in a session like today, where it was all about release and then smoothing out, right? Then afterwards, you kind of do this, you really touch your body and you do the things that you can do so the system smooths after you've released.
Yeah. Good. Thank you so much. That affirms kind of what I was thinking when I gave it a try last week. And yeah, and they were playing music and stuff, so it all kind of blended together. Yes. It's so obvious.
Yeah. I forgot about that. This is something, it's good that you say that, because I always start my practice with the same piece of music. Have for many, many, many years. It changes every couple of years. I pick a new piece of music, but essentially I start my practice always with the same piece of music, so my body lands really quickly, right? And so I have, on occasion, brought a iPod along, some music along, to play my practice music, which immediately transports me into that state. Right. So that's also an option, of course. Right. The more you can do to distract yourself, the better.
Yeah.
Distract yourself while staying in your body, of course. You know.
Yeah, totally. I found it helpful actually when I did what you suggested, like moving fingers and toes and subtle spinal movements and neck and different things throughout, that it really did take my attention away from the localized thing that was going on in my mouth.
Yes.
And I think I felt kind of more fluid throughout the treatment and then afterwards than I normally would have. I felt less frozen.
Yeah. And I think that's the indicator of good practice, right? Is you're less frozen. Yeah.
Yeah.
My question is about the insights I get during the practice, all those that flow in. I don't want to forget them and find that I tune into my mind, wondering how I can remember them after the practice. Do I need to remember them? Should I try and hold on to them or just keep moving and whatever needs to be known in reality will be known? That's a good question. Um, there's a few approaches to that question, right? So if you're in the middle of a release practice, it's not a good idea if you're trying to hold on to stuff, because that's, of course, counteracts the release. The whole idea is things pop up and out. And of course, in the middle of that, you will have insights. So in a release practice, it's probably best to let things wash out and hope that whatever you do need to remember is remembered. There's other practices, for instance, when we work more on the creative aspect, where you're working specifically on creativity and on bringing things in. And what I do sometimes, particularly when I'm writing or I have some busy stuff happening, then I have a notepad, and without even opening my eyes, I just scribble stuff on my notepad, or I have a voice recorder on. So those are some little hacks, or however you want to call it, if you really feel like you're in the middle of some really creative upwelling, then it would be a shame if it all just disappears. But I find typically that if I don't hold on to it, it clarifies and I have it available to me later on as well. But so those are just some little tricks if you want to keep things. But in general, don't hold on to things. The entire practice is about not holding on to things. So you don't want to counteract it.
So if I'm honest, like I did it for like the first half, and then I'm still my work day. So I was listening while I was doing my work for the second half. And I really loved how you talked about like moving as love and compassion. And so it got me wondering, because it's something I want to try on my own with my own practice. And one of my questions is that I know there was kind of more of a focus on release first before trying to embody that. And so I'm wondering, is it important to kind of focus on sort of releasing what's in the body before trying to embody another emotion, for example, love?
No, not really. I mean, how can I say this? There's many modalities to nonlinear, right? There's some that are commonly applied, and then there are some that kind of are unfolding, as I teach. And the more, now that I'm teaching so regularly, I unpacked some of my personal practice things for you guys. And, and there's some things that I teach regularly in workshops, but not necessarily usually publicly. So there's different ways to slice nonlinear. And what we did today is we focused on kind of letting go. And then anytime we work with letting go, it's also really nice to remember the heart, right? The fact that we do have a heart, that we love, that we're being loved, that even in the midst of some gnarly stuff, there is love. So it goes together very nicely that way. And it's good to always remember compassion towards oneself and others. Mm-hmm. But you could just, and we have done that in some of the sessions, you can just focus on the heart and, feel moving whatever you're feeling in the love and heart department. Or you could really just focus on, that sensation of loving kindness or things like that. So it doesn't have to be always the release. What makes it nice to do some release before the heart is that there's a little bit more space available, right?
Yeah.
And that's always nice when there's a little bit of extra available receptivity and available expression of the heart. You know, that's always very welcome, I think. So it's not a must. And you know,
oh, sorry.
Every session is different. So yeah.
It makes me think of actually of like the metta meditation where you're like wishing kindness and peace upon other people. And it feels like, you know, perhaps there's a way to embody that sort of meditation or I don't know, desire, you know, there's a way to like put that out in the world, like in a method through nonlinear.
Yeah. I think that's very likely and reasonable that you could do that, you know, where you kind of put your loving kindness meditation in movement, in motion. That's certainly a very wonderful way to go at it. Curious to learn more about the contraction and release technique. What does that do? Well, that was just one of the suggestions. So there's many ways that we can release through the body, right? So one of the ways we can release through the body is to just feel things physically, so meaning physical sensations as well as emotions and things like that, and just kind of get rid of them or shake them out. And the nervous system in itself has a function where you release through shaking, right? That there is a very specific nervous system built-in function that allows that to happen, which we can kind of stimulate by shaking and moving things out and doing that kind of thing. You can also move your body in ways that release, that is not necessarily shaking, where you, you know, just feel the stuff and iron it out and smooth it out. Or you can feel contraction and intensify the contraction, like just stronger, and then within that tension and release, there's functions in the muscles where there's a little bit more openness after the extreme tension. So that's a common technique that is used also in things like stretching, in trauma therapy, in somatics. So those are just some different options for you to explore. And I find contraction and release sometimes very interesting, because when you really contract around something, you can feel where it's connected with emotion and other physical places. So for instance, if my shoulder gets sometimes very tight, if I contract the shoulder strong enough, then when I do that, I can actually feel the emotional impulse to that tension, which is a shoulder to the grindstone kind of a feeling, right? Like a pushing. And so when I do that intensifying, I can feel the emotional push underneath the physical tension. And then when I let that go, the whole thing goes. So it's kind of an internal teaching tool for yourself to contract and then release, which is just, you know, I always think one should explore everything that can be explored as possible. And so this is a good one. So
my question is, when we were in that release piece, I was kind of in a pretty angry spot. Like I felt I was just right there. I was really just mad, whatever. And so transitioning to the heart was really hard. Like I was trying to find a pathway to get away from that previous, you know, deep anger or whatever. So do you have any tips on that kind of a transition to access that when you're coming from that spot?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat that because you're very low in volume. So just in case people didn't hear you. No, that's no problem. So he was saying that he had a lot of anger happening in the release. And so it didn't feel natural to transition into the heart from that anger. And what are there any tips? Well, here's the thing. Whatever shows up, shows up. So if you're not done with the anger well, then just disregard my instruction, right? That's one option, because I'm just a guide. And then whatever unfolds, unfolds. And you might have to do a few more sessions on the anger, as it arises. So that's one option. However, there's another option, and that is to understand that all emotions are love, right? So you could just assume that everything is love. Everything is holy, or everything's God, or everything's love, however you want to say that. Meaning, sometimes anger is a loving, how shall I say this? It's a loving momentum. So for instance, right, you have children. If your children do something that you have to keep them safe, like that, whatever, somebody's dangling out of the window, you might snatch them back with a certain amount of anger and a sharp, no, don't do that, right? But that's motivated by love, of course, right? You love them so dearly that you'll have to just grab and snatch them. And that might look to the outside as a very violent act, but it's motivated by love. And then, of course, once you have them safely inside, you might comfort them or explain something. So anger is just an emotion, and all emotions are love in action, so to speak, right? So, but we forget that, because often when we are angry, our heart closes. And that isn't necessarily the best course of action, because you cut yourself off from compassion for yourself, compassion for the other person. Now, that might not change the anger, because you might rightfully need to be angry. But if you're not closing the heart, which is why we do the heart after release, that's the secret here, is to infiltrate even the gnarliest, arisings with the heart. So there's a little bit of permeability there. So there's a little bit, it's like bubbles in the dough, in the thick, dough of the emotional thing. And so it kind of permeates it a bit and breaks it up. That's the whole idea. So it's nice to remember that you have a heart.